saw yesterday the creation of man, both stories of the creation of man. This was that was on page 11. On page 13, then there's some geography that's put in. Page 13. One second. Let's go back to verse 8 on page 11. Hashem, God, planted a garden in Eden to the east and placed there the man whom he had formed. It's a puzzle for me. I haven't looked up all the commentaries. It's a puzzle for me why Hashem did it that way. He could have created the garden and then created Adam in the garden. But he didn't. He created man and then he made the garden and then he put man in the garden. 9 says, Hashem God caused to sprout from the ground every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food. That'll be very important later. Also the tree of life in the midst of the garden and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. So, 15 then picks up the story. Hashem God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden, repeating what he said before, as I told you, but now it gives a purpose, to work it and to guard it, whatever that means. In other words, he put him there, first of all, with responsibility. And Hashem God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden, now your translator says, you may freely eat, but the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it. For on the day that you eat from it, you shall surely die. So let me tell you what the Hebrew says more literally, and then tell you that others translate a little differently from this. It says, of every tree of the garden, you shall eat. The verb to eat is doubled. Now, when you double a verb in Hebrew, that usually indicates some kind of emphasis, a strengthening of the idea. If you understood this as a command to eat from the other trees, then you would understand that it means the command is definite and absolute. Just like in the next sentence, when it says, if you eat from the tree of knowledge, you shall surely die, the verb there is doubled, mos tamus. That's why your translator writes, you shall surely die. It's definite, because it's doubled. Now your translator here writes, of every tree of the garden you may eat. That's not a command, that's a permission. Not to tell you what you must do, it's telling you what you're allowed to do, what you can do. How do you emphasize a permission? You're very permitted, you very can. So what did your translator do? He put in, you may freely eat. That's deep, you can eat freely. I don't know what that emphasis counts for. I don't know what he gets. 2 fruits a day, or instead of 1 fruit a day. Right? It's hard to emphasize and give more strength to a permission. You can emphasize and give more strength to a command. And there are those who say that Adam had 2 different responsibilities. A responsibility not to eat from the tree of knowledge, and he had a positive responsibility to eat from the trees of the garden. This will make a big difference, morally speaking, spiritually speaking. So now, he's there to guard it and to work it and guard it in some sense or other, and also, this is what he's supposed to do vis-a-vis the trees of the garden. Now comes the famous sequence, which is chewed over hundreds of times in different contexts. It is not good. Hashem God said, it is not good that man be alone. I will make him a helper corresponding to him. And that, of course, is the woman. Now, I want you to pay very careful attention to the words here. The translation here is correct, but in many translations they get it wrong. I will tell you the difference. I'll tell you the two of them. You tell me what's the difference between them. Why is it important that the difference between the correct translation and the incorrect translation? The correct translation here says, it is not good that man be alone. The incorrect translation is, it is not good for man to be alone. Almost the same thing. It is not good that man be alone versus it is not good for man to be alone. What difference do you see between the two of them?
For and the that.
Yes, that's the difference in the words. Okay, that's a start. Now, what would the difference in meaning be?
Purpose. Can we emphasize the need the man has to fulfill, so that Hashem is taking care of that?
Okay, but now, my question was, what's the difference between the two formulations?
One's for himself.
One's a purpose. I think like that. For man to be alone implies he shouldn't be. Or he has an obligation not to be. That almost gives like a choice. And
Okay, we're working on something. What you said is, I think, again, let's take the wrong one. What would, it's not good for man to be alone. What would that imply? What would that mean?
Implies him, for him.
For him, right. So then when woman is created, what's the purpose in creating woman?
For the man.
To give him something that he needs so that for him, he'll be in a good condition. She's created for him. It's not good for him to be alone, so I'm going to create something that will be with him so he won't be alone. Obviously, I'm creating it for him, so he shouldn't be alone. That's not the right translation. The right translation is, it's not good that man be alone. Man's being alone is not a good state of affairs. Who's it not good for? Doesn't say. Why is it not good? Doesn't say. Doesn't say where the failure is. Doesn't say what the problem is. So now, when the woman is created, from the point of view of the text, you don't have any particular information about what she's supposed to do, what her place is supposed to be. The rest of the verse does talk about, we'll get to that, but up to this point you don't have it. Right? Now, the oral tradition gives an expression to one way to look at the problem of man's being alone. God is one and only one, unique and incomparable to anything else. And he's the creator and the ruler of the universe. In the creation, Adam, the man, by himself, is superior to everything else in the universe. He's the only one with real intellect. He's the only one with spiritual experience. He's the only one with moral values. He's utterly incomparable, even to the chimpanzees, the works of the primatologists who fantasized and romanticized what's going on with chimpanzees and pretend that they're, just like 7-year-old kids. Because he's singular, incomparable, superior to everything else in the creation, he looks like an image of God in the sense that he's like a demigod. Just like the Creator is above and has authority and is unique in the whole of existence, so in the created world, Adam plays that same role. That's the problem. The problem is he looks too godlike because of his singularity. Okay, if that's the problem, what must the woman be to solve that problem? She's got to be, could she be inferior to him? If she were inferior, she would just reinforce the problem. To be another thing he's superior to, another thing that he's incomparable to, another thing that he's over and above. That wouldn't solve the problem. Only if she's an equal, then there are two. We don't have two creators. We don't have two gods. One of God's defining characteristics is his singularity. So if she's an equal, then there are two. That breaks his being singular, and it solves the problem. That's the first indication that a woman has to be equal to him. Different, but equal, not inferior. But that's based crucially on getting the right translation. Because if you had the wrong translation, if you thought it meant it's not good for him to be alone, then she'd be created for him, something else he needs to have, something else he has to use, and then she would be inferior and it wouldn't be a problem. And since it says it's not good that he be alone, and the oral tradition preserves the problem, you can't say that. Yeah.
This may be a little bit of a stretch, but do you not say that woman, like man and woman, like the woman gave man that ability to become like God, and that ability to reproduce, and actually creates life. And then in a sense goes, actually gave them more of a way to be seen as God-like figures than not.
That would be true if she was running a laboratory and she took his DNA and made out of his DNA another living being. That you could say that she gave to him the ability to reproduce and so forth and so on. But actually, as you know very well, each one needs the other to reproduce. And reproduction is something they do together. So again, it doesn't make him superior to her. They have to collaborate on the outcome. And that means it takes two. And each one has to say, I cannot do it without the other. And that doesn't make him godlike. It means there are two.
But if they unite, wouldn't they be together like a one?
Okay, so now this is a very important idea. In fact, just let me give you a little more basis for your question. We're going to go back here to page 13 in a moment, but just take a look. On page 23. Why is this? Oh, I see. Sorry, 25. Very top of the page. This is the account of the descendants of Adam. On the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. We saw that before. He created them male and female. He blessed them and called their name. Now, in the Hebrew, it's Adam. He called their name Adam. Not his name, their name. So there you are. That's the two of them together that bear the name Adam. Your helpful friendly translator has a problem here because he thinks calling them now ought to be a name of the species, and the name Adam has been used as a proper name of a particular person. They want to have it both ways, so therefore we'll use a different word. We'll call it man, because that's what it's supposed to indicate. But the word in Hebrew is Adam. So that I think that's correct. Now, when you talk about, did you use the word fusing? Unite. So unite is a very flexible word. Let's put it that way. Sometimes the phrase that's used in English is to become one. And you have to be aware that there's an ambiguity here that runs very deep. Some people think if A and B are going to become one, then A and B are going to become identical. They'll only be one, not two. I mean, either A has to become identical with B, or B with A, or the two of them become identical with C. Some kind of change has to take place, and you end up with one instead of two. You could use the word unite that way. You could use the word become one that way, but you don't have to. Let's say we're considering a Beethoven violin sonata. So you have a violinist and a pianist. Now imagine the violinist playing just the violin part. There's no piano. Well, it's going to be a little weird because part of the time he's just standing there counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. He's counting the rest. And then sometimes it doesn't sound right. Like, just the tune doesn't resonate. And same thing's true with the piano. Sometimes the piano part sounds weird. So here, you have to unite the two instruments and their music to make the whole sonata. And when the violin and the piano play together, then you get a musical composition that's meaningful, that's understandable, that's moving, that has the dynamics that music ought to have. But the violin is still a violin. And the piano is still a piano. And there's still two. There are two that are united in function. That's also a way of being united. Becoming one in terms of having a single integrated function. Produced by two items, each of which contributes something different to that functioning. You all have experienced, for the whole of your lives, that kind of unity. It's the unity of the human body. Body is a unit because it has many parts function together for certain basic purposes, one of which is maintaining life, which largely requires homeostasis in certain ways. That doesn't make the liver and the spleen and the heart all the same organ. They're all different organs, and they all have different subfunctions, but they contribute all to the function of keeping the body as a whole alive. That's also a unity. So that's the kind of unity that we're talking about now. Yeah.
Two questions. One, does this imply that man was somewhere else before the Garden of Eden?
Okay, that's what I mean. Yes, it implies, it says it directly. He created him, made the Garden of Eden, and then he brought him from where he was to the Garden of Eden. And I'm not quite sure why that should be. I have a thought, but I have no basis for the thought. If he were created in the Garden of Eden, he could have concluded that the whole of the creation is like this. But no, he was someplace else, which wasn't the Garden of Eden. It didn't have the character of the Garden of Eden. And he's taken into the Garden of Eden, and now he knows that this is a select place. Select place. If it's a select place, then maybe his residence there is precarious. Maybe it could be reversed. If you thought the whole of the world was identical, there's nobody else to go. But now there is somebody else to go. That's one thought. The other thought is, Chosh Baruch Hu put me here and not there because he wants me to have the position of the Garden of Eden and not that. So you'll very much appreciate what you have by seeing what the alternative is. If you don't know what the alternative is, so then you don't appreciate it as well. I'm not taking the old philosophical saw, everything is defined by knowing what its alternative is. No, but you don't appreciate it as well. If a person were born and he were introduced into a human society where he never saw anyone die, and then he had a near accident which might have killed him, he doesn't know what he might have lost and what he's gained. Because he's never seen anybody die, so he doesn't know that he was safe from death. If he does see people die, knows why they die, then he appreciates what happened in the accident much better because he knows what the alternative is. So it could be that seeing the other state of the world and then being put into the Garden of Eden gives him a perspective, okay, I'm here and not there. I have these things which I wouldn't have had over there. I can appreciate much better what he has there. This is, I think, superficial, but at least to start. So that's one thing that I think is right. It says for sure, he was created here, Garden of Eden was made there, and he was brought into the Garden of Eden. That's right.
He knew about the exile where he ended up being put afterwards, or?
Well, yes and no. He did know, he was told he's going to be expelled from the Garden of Eden, but when he ate from the tree of knowledge, the whole world changed drastically. We'll talk about that when we get to the end of the story. Yeah, you had another question?
Yeah, also, with women, they're not inferior, but men could technically rule over.
Okay, let's see. But that's the next verse. That's coming up in the next verse. Let's go to the second half of this verse. She shall be a helper corresponding to him. Now, here again, the translator is doing his best. Ezer means helper, and kenegdo could mean corresponding. It also can mean opposed to. Keneged usually means opposed to. If you take it to be a helper opposed to, that's kind of hard to explain. You know, a helper usually is on your side, acting on your behalf. And if the person is opposed to you, then he's not acting on your behalf. So the Midrash splits it up and says, if he deserves it, if he merits it, then she'll be a helper. And if he doesn't merit it, she'll be against him. Now let's think about the implications of that Midrash. So he might merit it and might not. His condition might be one of deserving and one of not deserving. Obviously, it'd be better to have merit than not, better to deserve than not. So he could be either up or down. Now let's figure out her position. If he's up and deserves her help, she gives him her help. That means he's good and right. She's also good and right because she's participating in his good and right. If he's down and doesn't merit it, doesn't deserve it, then she's against him, which is also good and right. She's opposing him when he doesn't deserve to be helped. So whereas he goes up and down, she apparently is always up. I don't think that's what you expect to hear from patriarchal, misogynist, ancient religion, but that's what the story tells you. That in this position of variation, he's pictured as going up and down, and she's pictured as being consistently on the right side. Now, there's another thing to say here. So let's say he deserves it. So she's created to help him. Doesn't that make her inferior? If A's purpose in life is to help B do what? Help B develop, help B achieve, help B create. That doesn't sound like B's the center. B's actions, development, and creation are really what needs to be done. And A is just helping B achieve that. So then A would be inferior to B because A is created to help B. That's a very natural thought, and I've heard it expressed many times. I think it's an utterly incompetent thought, both in secular terms and even more so in Jewish terms. So let's go through them one by one. Okay. If A's job is to help B, A is inferior to B. Pity the poor psychiatrist. Guy comes in and says, Doc, I have this problem. Every night before I go to sleep, I've got to wash my hands 106 times. Help! It's crazy! My hands, the skin of my hands is peeling off, and I can't, it takes me an hour and a half, and I can't get enough sleep. Do something! So either he gives him a medication, or he talks to him, or does both, and then, after a while, he doesn't have to wash his hands. So that means the psychologist is a toady. He's a nothing. He's just helping the other guy not wash. He's obviously inferior to the other guy. His job is to make his life, the other guy's life better. So he's got to be inferior to him, right? And so with all doctors, and so with all educators. Educators talk to people who are less educated than they are, so that they can improve their knowledge and understanding. What a waste. What a degradation. That the teacher should be spending his time training other people's minds. that makes him a slave, makes him worthless. And not only the helping professions. I have to talk to you about something which is very sensitive, and you may have to wrestle with this psychologically, but someday you'll probably have to get a job. I know you're putting it off, and you're trying to forget about it, and you're reading certain books, but you'll probably have to get a job. Now, you'll get a job, and they'll pay you to work for them. Why are they paying you? They're paying you because you're making more money for them than they're paying you. That's why they're paying you. You're a toady, you're a slave. You're just there to make money for them. So that means everyone who works, everyone who earns a living is somehow inferior, trivial, not accountable. Hasn't something gone wrong with the logic here? The fact that you're helping somebody else doesn't mean that you're inferior to the other person. That's just plain secular logic. But in religious terms, it's much worse. Tell me something. Since the creation, what has the Creator been doing? Only one thing. He's managing the creation so that we can achieve our potential. It's all an act of loving kindness. If you think that A's activity in helping B makes A inferior to B, it comes out that the Creator is the most inferior there is. That doesn't seem to be a right conclusion. So the idea that A is created as a helper for the development of B doesn't make that person inferior. And I think that women whose minds aren't destroyed by certain ideologies, women know this. I don't think any, or not more than 0.5% of women who have children and who raise the children feel that because they're raising children, they're inferior. Because what are they doing? They're just improving the lives of these children. And their whole efforts are to make their lives better. So therefore, she's got to be very inferior to that 2-year-old, or that 6-year-old, or that 10-year-old. I don't think anybody feels that way. So the whole mindset is just an incompetent mindset. Anyway, that's what she's created to do. Okay, that's the creation of woman. Now the rest, the interim here is not something that I want to talk about. Now let's go to chapter 3 on page 15 and start the story of the Garden of Eden itself. The serpent was cunning beyond any beast of the field that Hashem, God, had made. So I mentioned to some of you, if you take what you know of the story and try to read this verse, it's really quite puzzling. In this story, the serpent speaks, argues, reasons, deceives. This verse says, and he's smarter than a cow, or a horse, or a wolf. Golly, couldn't you have figured it out yourself? I mean, if he's talking and reasoning and deceiving, and he's punished for his action, couldn't you figure out that he's superior to a horse or to a wolf? So, Rosh Chaim Lutzato, the great Kabbalist, writes in one of his Sforim that the animals at the time of the creation could also speak. Then I thought, wow. So then this verse makes sense. They can all speak. They can all talk. They can all converse. But he's smarter than the rest of them. Now it tells you something. If you don't have that background, it's very difficult to understand what this verse is contributing to you. There's an example of how if you see something on the deeper level, sometimes reflects back on the superficial level and enables you to see things you didn't see before. Anyway.
Question on back still with splitting it. So, just on the language that is used, Adam is for the species of man and is also used to refer to the unified man and woman. But then when they split, it's Adam and Isha. Okay, so now let's get it straight. I didn't mention that, but you're right to ask. The translator translated Adam there as man, but it's not correct because the title of the species is B'nai Adam, the descendants of Adam. Adam now is a name, as it says in chapter 5, for the male and female together, because as you said, they become unified into a single functioning entity to a great extent, and that being the case, they deserve a single name for the two of them. But that refers to the first two, and only the first two. And after that, it's the descendants of Adam, which then becomes the whole human race. So it refers to, it also says woman, but does it switch to Ish? For man?
So now,
Or
yes,
does it Isha?
well, I skipped that, but if you we're on page 15, right? Just look up higher on the page. Take a look at verse 21. Put it in. Shem, God cast a deep sleep on the man, and he slept. He took one of his sides and filled his flesh in its place. Then Hashem fashioned that side that he had taken from the man, into a woman, and he brought it to the man. And the man said, "This time it is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. This shall be called Isha." He gives her that name because she's taken from Ish. So Isha with a hey indicates something that was derived from Ish.
I see from Ish there.
Right.
And then where do we get Chava from? Or is that?
That comes at the end of the Garden of Eden story, and he gives her that name also.
Then the man part, does he ever get an actual name? Because Adam, I thought if Adam refers to both of them, and she has a name, does he also have an individual name?
Yes, I mean he's called by that name before chapter 5.
Okay.
And there it's his personal name as well. You know, you have words like this in English also, which have a double use. Man can be used to refer to the male sex, or it can be used to refer to the species, male and female. And you just have to know from the context what it's referring to. So you can have for example, there are people who are the progenitors of a nation, like Moab. There was a person named Moab, and then there was a nation named Moab. And the same word is used for a single person and also for a whole group of people. So you have to just be aware that the same word can be used in multiple ways, and you have to pay attention, to the context to figure it out. And this is it's a bit of a project. Even the same author in the same book can use the same word in two or more different ways. So you just have to be aware of that, and then pay attention to the context. Okay, so let's start the dialogue now. This is chapter 3, verse 1. He was cunning. He said to the woman, "Did perhaps God say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?" Fill me in. I see you're both here in the garden, and this is your residence. What are your instructions? How did God give you your instructions for living in the garden? Did he perhaps say, don't eat anything? Which then, of course, leads you to wonder, well, if they're not supposed to eat anything, how are they supposed to survive? Okay, that's what the serpent asks. The woman said to the serpent, "Of any tree of the garden we may eat. Of the fruit of the tree that is in the center of the garden, God has said, you shall neither eat of it nor touch it, lest you die." Now let's see. When God gave the instruction not to eat from the tree of knowledge, she wasn't created yet. So how would she know what the instructions are?
She made from him, so does she?
Must be, he told her. Well, since he told her, it's interesting to note that she did not report the instruction correctly. What did God say not to do about that tree?
Eat it.
Not eat. She says, we were told not to eat it or to touch it. Furthermore, it doesn't come out in the English so well, but in the Hebrew, it says, of the fruit of the tree, of the fruit of any tree that we may eat. Here the verb to eat is single, not doubled. Your translator, I guess, expects you to notice that there it said you may freely eat, and here it doesn't say freely eat. But the text in the Hebrew, which God said to Adam was, achol tochel, doubly the eating, and here it's only singly. So that's the second difference. So the commentators say the following. First of all, he changed it. When he told it to her, he changed it. And according to some, he made a terrible, tragic mistake. God said, don't eat from it. Yeah, but who knows? And if we're around it all the time, and if we actually come in contact with it, will we be able to survive the temptation to eat from it? Let's make another rule. Let's make another rule not to touch it. Okay, if he had said to her, look, he said not to eat. It's a danger of death. Let's agree that we won't touch it. That would have been fine, but he didn't. He said to her, God said, don't eat and don't touch. That's going to be crucial in the next move.
Is that like adding rabbinic law?
Yes, it's just like adding a rabbinic law. And this is one of the sources where they say that when the rabbis add a law, they are duty-bound to advertise that it's a rabbinic law and not a biblical law. Absolutely. And he failed at that requirement. So I'll do this a little bit out of order. Verse 4, the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. What do you think? I'll take a question in a second. What do you think her reaction should be when he says that?
How do you know?
I mean, drop dead. What are you talking about? There's a creator. And the creator spoke to the man, and he told me this is what he said. You say it's not true? Why should I listen to you? Why should I pay any attention to you? So the Midrash fills in an interim event, which makes perfect sense out of it. Since she thinks the command was, don't eat or touch it, lest you die, the serpent pushed her against the tree. And when she touched the tree and didn't die, he said, see? Just like the touching part isn't true, the eating part isn't true either. Now here you get a double message. On the one hand, without something in between, it's impossible to understand how the story goes on. But also, if you think about it, she could have figured this out. And the fact that she didn't bespeaks a certain weakness in her. What did God mean when he said, don't eat from it, because the day that you eat from it, you'll surely die? Does he mean the fruit is laced with arsenic? There's a high power in the trees? When you bite into it, you're going to be electrocuted? Is that what he means? I'm just telling you something for your good. I'm your friend. I don't want you to get hurt. These things are dangerous. Don't eat them because they're dangerous. Is that what he's saying? Or is he saying, I'm commanding you not to eat from it, and if you violate my command, there's going to be a punishment, a penalty. And the punishment will be death. Which do you think it is? They're inherently dangerous and he's giving good advice, or he's giving a command and telling them that this is the penalty if they violate the command?
It seems like a command.
It certainly sounded like a command. He said, don't do this, right? And then that means that you will only be punished if what? If you're responsible for violating the command, not if it's an accident, and certainly not if somebody caused you to violate it. You wouldn't be punished for that. That would be unjust. Wouldn't be fair. So she should have thought, wait a second. God said, don't do it, and he specified the penalty for violating his command. You pushed me against it. I didn't violate his command. I fell because you pushed me. So it's no surprise that I didn't die. She didn't say that. You have to understand where she's coming from. But without the interim, nothing could possibly have happened. That's one part of the issue. As you know, they end up eating. Now, the other part of the issue is he told her, in terms of eating from the other trees of the garden, he used a single verb, which really is permission. Really can be permission. Didn't give her the doubled verb. And here, there's a deeper thought. When you eat, if you think you have permission, it means I can eat or not. It's up to me, and it makes no difference. If you're told to eat, then that means when you're eating, you're also doing something that the Creator wants you to do. And if you're spiritually aware, you think, well, if I've been hungry, I've had to eat. I don't want to die of starvation. But He wants me to eat. So this is part of my relationship with Him, that I'm eating from the tree. And they say that if they had experienced the positive side, spiritually, that would have helped to protect them from the temptation to violate the negative side. But they didn't. They ate it as if it was pizza, With the like. You like it, you don't like it. You want a falafel instead? Take your choice, but it's up to you. So they didn't use the positive side spiritually, which would have helped to protect them against falling to the negative side. So this difference that Adam put into the report to her of what had been told to him was tragic. It had those two differences, which led to, they didn't cause, but it led to the downfall of both of them. Yeah.
Okay, to clarify, Adam told Eve the message from God, not to Eve. Then, from Eve's perspective, why wasn't she able to view both the word from the snake and from Adam in an equal manner? The snake wasn't wrong when he said that you won't die, but Adam said he heard it from God. You're like, who's Eve to really believe out of the two? In fairness,
Well, if someone asks, what is the GDP of the state of Wyoming? And someone says, $50,000. And somebody says, it says in the Encyclopedia Britannica that it's $50,000. Who would you believe? Wouldn't you believe the one who said, I know it from the Encyclopedia Britannica? Because he's taking it from a much reliable source. So one says, I have it from the most reliable source of all. The other one says, it's not true. He didn't say, God told me it's not true. He just says, I'm saying it's not true. That's not the question. The question is, why should you pay attention before he proved it? Why doesn't she simply say, drop dead? There's got to be something there that overcomes that natural resistance, natural skepticism. I have it from my husband that the Creator said this, and you're saying it's not true. But, leave me alone. Okay. So, and then he goes on and gives a corrupt reading of what of the reason for it. Verse 5, for God knows that on the day that you'll eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you'll be like God, knowing good and bad. Those words, we'll see, have a different translation when they're repeated later in the story. But that's his corrupt way of, he's protecting his uniqueness by not allowing you to eat from it. Now comes a very important description here, for two reasons. 6, the woman perceived that the tree was good for eating, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a means to wisdom. And she took of its fruit and ate. So let's see. This is a tree in the garden, right? She perceived that it was good for eating, number 1. It was a delight to the eyes, number 2. And the tree was desirable as a means to wisdom. Now, I don't expect you to remember this, but let's look back when God created the garden and made the trees in the garden and see how they're described. Look back on top of 13. Hashem caused to sprout from the ground every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food. How's that different from what she said? Or what went through her mind? Number 1, there's wisdom at the end, but also in addition to that, the order is switched. On 13, it's sight first and eating second. And in her case, it's eating first and sight second. That's one thing to pay attention to. And the other to pay attention to is this. What did the serpent promise her if she would eat from it? Knowledge, wisdom, right? He promised her wisdom. That's third after the other two. How much did the serpent really contribute to this downfall? Only the hanger on at the end. Her motivation started with eating and then was reinforced by seeing and also wisdom. So if you think of this as the attempt to become wise, and to become godlike, and to fulfill your intellectual potential, that ain't the right story. And if you compare good for eating versus a pleasure to the eyes, the one is directly physical. We have it in common with animals. It's not obvious that animals have any aesthetic perception at all. Even animals or birds with eyesight superior to ours don't sit and stare at the sunset. Look at those colors. awesome. It's changing the whole time. I don't want to move till the sun's gone. You don't see that. So if you're talking about the different realms of the human existence, the eating part is the lowest, most animalistic side. That's why, one of the infinity of reasons why in the Garden of Eden, it says first that it's a pleasure to the eyes, and secondly that it's good to eat. Because that refers to the higher side of the person. In her case, it's eating first and pleasure to the eyes second, which refers to the order, and then wisdom is after all of that, after the pleasure of filling my stomach, and after the pleasure of enjoying the aesthetics of it, yeah, also there'll be wisdom. That puts a very different spin on her experience when she ate from it. Now, I want to put in one more thing here before it gets lost. This is her thought, right? So, if this depicts a weakness, a spiritual weakness, intellectual weakness, gee, that's really too bad because it's talking about her. But that's not true. According to Maimonides, the great philosopher, and Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the great Kabbalist, these are his words also. They describe him directly. In the second chapter of the guide, Maimonides says, this is why he did it. And he quotes this verse. So even though it was said, with the Torah tells us it was her perception, they understand that it was a shared perception. I have a hint to it, which I think could be right, though I didn't see any of the commentators say it. But if you just take a glance on page 17, it says, she ate, and it says, she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. Gee, that's a lot of connection. There's an also and a with her. What would you have thought? She sent it by UPS, to Nevada, and she's in West Virginia. Of course, they're sitting together. What else would it be? So I think this indicates that she communicated her vision to him, and he accepted it. And that's why Maimonides and Luzzatto both say that these are his words as much as hers. So there's no attempt here to say she's the inferior one and he didn't, and it was, that's at least one classical way to look at it. Yeah.
It sounds very weird, doesn't it? Like, they saw that she perceived the tree was good for eating, but like, are you saying that all the other trees were not good enough? Like, this particular tree had something about it that was so amazing looking that, like, and we're talking about people that were on much higher spiritual level than we are now, right? So, like,
Maimonides really puts it that way. He says the transgression here goes in stages, and the first stage was to become focused on one's physical desires. That was the first stage. After that, their internal intellectual superiority was degraded. Because it was degraded, a certain grasp of the reality was denied them, and then that made room for an inferior grasp, and then that led them to eat and be degraded into that inferior grasp. It's a several stage process, but the initial stage of the process is focusing on physical desires. Okay, for that, yeah.
Why do we see the snake as so evil when what he said, in a sense, is actually true? I mean, like, he said surely won't die, it didn't die. He says you'll know good and evil, the tree of knowledge should give it to them. And in a sense, it did become like God having the ability to reproduce. I mean, in a sense, the snake wasn't lying all out.
Well, first of all, I think either you said it before or you said it as well. The word reproduce with respect to God is really not appropriate, is it? Because to reproduce would mean to make more gods. That's reproduce. You reproduce yourself. And that's not what's going on. When God creates life, he's not creating more gods. So it's not like reproduction for plants and animals and human beings, where human beings make more human beings, and oak trees make more oak trees, and squirrels make more squirrels. It's really not the same thing. You could talk about creating life in a more general sense, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same process with the same significance. Number one. Number two, I suppose you're referring to the fact that it says on the day that you eat from it, you will die, and they didn't die in that day. And you're saying, therefore, that what is, yes, but that's not correct. I mean, the Ramban already points that out. There's a parallel passage in the prophets, someplace, where King Solomon says to someone, you are confined to the city of Jerusalem, and on the day that you leave the city of Jerusalem, you shall die. Same words that you have here. Mom, same words, right? And he leaves Jerusalem, and King Solomon executes him sometime later. That doesn't mean he broke his word or failed to live up to what he said. What the words mean is, as of now, there's no decree of death against you. But when you commit this crime, you will then be decreed for death. When it will become, you become from immortal to mortal. They became mortal on that day, and it was irreversible. Before that, they weren't going to die at all. When they'll actually die can depend upon other factors. So it doesn't mean that you stop living on that day. It means you can make the transition from immortal to mortal. And the same is true with I forget who it was that Solomon's working with. You now have a decree of death against you, and you're going to die by execution. Whereas before that, you didn't have that decree. So it doesn't come out that what he said is false. Okay, and he's certainly not becoming. And to say that was God's motivation, I guess the final thing to say is this: having eaten from the tree, do they really become comparable to God? Does God cease being unique, not special in any way? I mean, certainly not. So there's much more to be said, because this translation here, you'll become like God, knowing good and evil, there's another way to translate it, which Maimonides and Unclus both use, which we'll see at the end of the story, and then we'll have to come back and see that this is not what it seems to be over here. Okay? Everything else so far? Yeah, okay, we have another 5 minutes. So they eat. Then the eyes of the both were opened, and now the translation realized they were naked. They knew that they were naked, and they sewed together a fig leaf and made themselves aprons.
How big are fig leaves?
I don't know.
I don't know. Make an apron.
We have a fig tree right here by our door.
Oh, is that big enough to make an apron out of?
Well, we don't know what it was like back then.
That's also
Especially
true.
in,
You were talking about the trees in the Garden of Eden.
That's
But-
true, yeah.
But I'm a little disturbed by something else.
Was he there?
Can't you know that you're naked with your eyes closed?
Well,
Right? I mean,
Assume.
imagine that a person's naked, he closes his eyes. Do I have clothes on or don't I? I don't know. I'll take a look. Oh, yeah, I do. No, it's really not necessary, is it? Right, Maimonides points this out. Rashi, I think, points it out. The commentators point out here. It means they realized something about being naked that they didn't realize before. They realized some of its consequences that it has that they didn't realize before. In fact, I didn't read it to you, but the last sentence in the previous chapter, on 15:25, they were both naked, as man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. So if they're not ashamed, it means they know they're naked. It's just they didn't see any shame in it. And now they see a certain shame in being naked, and that's why they clothe themselves. And if you want to connect this with what Maimonides said, they, according to the Midrash, did engage in sexual relations before the crime took place. But their attitude towards it wasn't the kind of attitude that we have today. We look at it as something which is very animalistic, and it's animalistic because we let that desire control us and dictate things that we do. Not because there's a desire there, and not because it's shared with animals. The question is what role it plays in our psychology. you know very well the Jewish tradition is very private, but there are places in the Talmud where they discuss male and female sexuality without any hesitation whatsoever. Similar, when I first came across that, I thought, well, that's sort of like doctors. They deal with these things medically, and for the vast majority of them, it's just something that has a medical reality, and sometimes it needs help of some kind of fixing, and they fix it. That's human. That's not animal. It's when it's allowed to take over the person. So what did Maimonides say? The first step in the transgression was turning toward physical desires, focusing on them. There's a big difference between seeking pleasure and experiencing pleasure. There are pleasures that you can experience that you don't seek. See, people have this false psychology. If it's pleasant, you must desire it, and therefore it's not true. For example, I drove cars for 50 years, 60 years, however many years it was. If it was my position to drive wherever we're going, I drove. I found it pleasant and interesting, but I had no desire to drive. And the proof of it is that if I went 6 months without driving, I didn't miss it. Something you have a desire to do, if you're deprived of it, it develops a certain frustration. There are things which can be pleasant when you have them, and if you don't have them, you don't miss them. So that attitude towards pleasure, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. That's not animalistic. It's when you focus on it and think of it as a goal and think of it as something that you want for itself, then it can become animalistic. And that's one way of describing the transition here. They were naked and they engaged in relations and they had pleasure for the relations, but when they weren't doing it for whatever reason, it isn't as if, when are we going to get back to it? No. It was there, something that they experienced, and then let go of. After that, when they turned towards the physical and now had absorbed, had impressed upon themselves that focus, then they thought, then this could be very dangerous. And indeed, it can be very dangerous. Think of all the corruption that is fueled by this type of desire, this type of experience. Yeah.
Two things. One, so Adam was there while this whole conversation was. No, he just walks in and then
That's right.
she says, "Take this." So she ate from it. Did she feel shame the moment that she ate from it, or was it not until after he ate that she felt shame?
So I'll tell you something, I got to quit. I read in Mark Twain, he talks about these things, many things, very, very smart person. He says, she gave it to him because she didn't want that she should die, and he won't die, and then he'll marry somebody else. So I thought, goy. How crass can you be? Yeah, but Rashi says it. So he got it right in spades. It's not the only explanation. It's not the only way to look at it, but it's definitely a thought that, yeah, she felt ashamed and embarrassed, but that didn't stop her.
So she knew that she wasn't going to die. She was just going to feel the shame of it. No. What's it got to do with the other? We're not saying that she was taken in by the snake. It doesn't say that she believed she wouldn't die. It says it was good to eat and pleasant to the eyes and desirous to forgive wisdom. That's all it says. And she ate. But she knew, on the contrary, according to this explanation, she knew she's going to die. She will die. And then when she's dead, he's going to marry somebody else. I don't want that to happen. That's very low. It's very crass. That's her attitude after she ate. I feel like her expression would change from the shame, and he would have found something you know what I mean? Like she eats from it, she feels the shame, she sees what's going on, and her expressions must have changed to some degree. And then she says, "Oh, here, try this," but she's feeling the shame, maybe her face gets red or something like that. I don't know,
If there was shame, you mean?
if the shame came before.
Yeah, but the people, if shame would stop people from doing the wrong thing, the world would be a much more innocent place. There are things that people are ashamed of. I know people who have struggled with anger. And they know, especially if it happens in public, they know it's terrible, and they're ashamed of it, and they lose their anger and they lose their temper anyway. The fact that a person's shamed by something doesn't mean automatically they're going to do everything right. So, okay.